So I made it through the Game Boy Advance library, and I have to say I was very impressed. While I did own a Game Boy Advance growing up, I had next to no games for it, so most of the games I reviewed are ones that I was playing for the first time. I think the Game Boy Advance has the best library out of the systems I've looked at so far, and yes, that includes the Super Nintendo. While the Super Nintendo's library was, and still is, good, it was still early in the video game era, and people hadn't quite figured out yet what did and didn't work in games. Some of the Super Nintendo classics are genuinely timeless, like Super Metroid or Yoshi's Island, but most of them do have at least a few archaic quirks that do hold them back, whether it be a live system, frustrating controls, unfair difficulty, or dated graphics. They're still good, but they do show their age. By the time the Game Boy Advance came around, however, people had acquired a better idea of what did and didn't work in games, and consequently were much better at crafting them. The Game Boy Advance has similar capabilities to the Super Nintendo, but I found its games to be more consistently enjoyable. And even when I didn't like a game, it was usually because it just wasn't for me, rather than because it had questionable or outdated mechanics. Well, most of the time. The Game Boy Advance knew how to make smaller but beautifully elegant games, and most of them hold up perfectly even in 2017. And I'm going to go through my 10 personal favorites now. Narrowing it down to just 10 was rather tricky, so first I'll name the honorable mentions. First up we have Tactics Ogre Knight of Lotus and Golden Sun. While I ultimately had to stop playing them, as I just didn't find them super engaging, I did have some fun with them, and they both do a lot right, so I'm confident that they are good games, just not for me. Next is Mario vs. Donkey Kong, a simple but fun puzzle platformer, though the controls are a little stiff, and it can be frustrating at times. Mega Man Battle Network, a very enjoyable and unique take on the Mega Man series that managed to be both familiar and fresh. Well, it was unique, until they made a bunch of copy-paste sequels, but oh well. Next up is The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This game is kind of a guilty pleasure for me, a mixture of nostalgia and a fondness for the original source material. I know it's technically not a very good game, and I don't think it's one you need to play, but I had fun with it, so I thought I'd give it a mention. Choo Choo Rocket, a simple but addicting puzzle game. That's about all there is to say about it. Ninja 5-0, a retro-style platformer that recreates all the good aspects of retro games while updating or fixing all the bad aspects of retro games. Still, the way it locks off the last two stages if you're playing on easy mode is pretty dumb in my opinion. This is a game where even easy mode is a challenge, and I don't see any real reason why the last two stages couldn't have been available in easy mode. Even so, the game is fluid and fun enough for me to forgive that flaw, annoying as it is. And finally we have Summon Knight Swordcraft Story, an RPG game I actually liked. Maybe it's because of the smaller scale, maybe it's because of the characters, maybe it's because the combat isn't turn-based. Whatever the reason, I enjoyed this game, but it just barely missed making it onto my top 10. With that out of the way, let's get started. Up first we have Teen Titans. Like the Chronicles of Narnia game, my fondness for this game is a combination of nostalgia and enjoying the show the game is based on. However, even putting that aside, I do think Teen Titans is a solid enough game. It will mainly appeal to fans of the show, and I happen to be one of them, so I had a really good time with this game. I debated about which Wario game I should choose, Wario Land 4 or Wario Incorporated, as I quite enjoyed both. In the end though, Wario Land 4 is the more complete and less frustrating game of the two. It's a pretty standard platformer, but with enough tweaks and new ideas to make it stand out. He may not be as big as Mario, but Wario still has some good games under his belt, and I'll be sure to check out the earlier Wario Land games at some point. I really enjoyed Kirby's Adventure for the NES, and so I wasn't too surprised that I enjoyed its GBA remake, Nightmare in Dreamland. While I have been critical of the Kirby games for being a bit derivative, that doesn't change the fact that they're pure and simple fun. Nightmare in Dreamland captured what made Kirby's Adventure so fun, and added more life and color to it, resulting in a small but memorable adventure. Klonoa Empire of Dreams. What's that? You've never heard of this game? Well, neither had I until I played it. As I said in my review, it feels like a blend between Kirby and Sonic the Hedgehog, and has a greater emphasis on puzzles than on combat. After looking up more, I discovered that this wasn't Klonoa's first game, and that he actually had a couple of games on the PlayStation 1. I'll definitely be giving them a try at some point, because if they're anything like this one, they're probably a really fun experience. Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. My lists always seem to include a Zelda game when it comes to Nintendo's consoles, though this time the Zelda game is a bit lower on the list. Not that I don't love this game, I do, it's just that there are 5 games I like even more. While I don't think it's the best 2D Zelda game, it's certainly the best looking 2D Zelda game, and its unique mechanic allowing you to shrink down to the size of the Minish adds a new layer of depth to the world and the gameplay. It makes it stand out as a great adventure in a series full of great adventures. Advance Wars. Some call this the best strategy game ever made. I personally haven't played enough strategy games to make such a claim, but I can definitely say that it's one of the best strategy games ever made. It's got a ton of content, and I've put more hours into this game than any other game on this list. So much that I really don't want to think about it. Paper Mario was one of my favorite games for the N64, as it was a solid Mario RPG. So solid, in fact, that I wasn't sure how they could top it. Well, Superstar Saga doesn't top it, but it does come close, and it does it by having a fresh take on the Mario Brothers. Simple but elegant mechanics, engaging combat, quirky humor, funny characters, awesome music. Everything about Superstar Saga is excellent. I think Superstar Saga gets what a lot of other RPGs miss. Firstly, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and secondly, it makes sure that the gameplay is constantly engaging, as well as having a good story and characters. As an aside, when I did my review, I didn't even realize that there was a remake coming out, so that's why I didn't mention it. At the time of writing, I still haven't played the remake, so I don't know if it's better or worse, but in either case, the original version of Superstar Saga is still golden. I was kind of indifferent to the Metroid games. I didn't like the first one, and while I liked Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, I didn't love them. They were good games, but I just didn't have the same enthusiasm for them as other people seemed to. But Metroid Zero Mission really made me understand what people love about Metroid. It takes the basic foundation of the original Metroid and then creates something infinitely better. A well-crafted game that kept me fully engaged from beginning to end. There are a few nitpicks here and there, but on the whole, I loved this game. However, it's actually not my favorite Metroidvania-style game for the GBA. That honor goes to... Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. While I liked Circle of the Moon and loved Metroid Zero Mission, of the Metroidvania games on the GBA, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow is by far my favorite. It's funny because after replaying the game, I noticed that there are quite a number of flaws with the game, but its imperfections make it all the more endearing, and makes everything it does right stand out more. It's not a perfect game, but it's still a damn good one, and at the time of writing it is my favorite Castlevania game. But it's not my favorite GBA game. My favorite GBA game is... Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. I loved all of the Fire Emblem games for the GBA, but in the end, Blazing Sword was the clear winner in my eyes. It does have a few flaws, and it does lack some of the newer features of more recent Fire Emblems, but overall it doesn't really matter. It's well paced, the gameplay is almost perfectly polished, it's got a wonderful cast of characters, and it holds up pretty well. Still, if we could get a remake that includes the events of Blazing Sword and Binding Blade, that would be super awesome. So those are my 10 favorite Game Boy Advance games. I hope you enjoyed my list. Be sure to let me know what your favorite games for the Game Boy Advance are in the comments below. If you like what I do, feel free to subscribe and follow me on Twitter, and consider supporting me on Patreon, as doing so would help me to spend more time making more videos for you, and not worrying as much about food or rent. The next system I'll be looking at is the Sega Genesis, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to stick around. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.